Hello everybody and welcome to the workshop on feeding the soil. I'm Pam Dawling. I'm the author of 2 books, Sustainable Market Farming and the Year-Round Hoop House, and I have a website, sustainablemarketfarming.com. I do a blog post there every week, usually about Wednesday, and if you like you can sign up to get it sent to your email every week, or you can see it on Facebook, your choice. Here I am in the hoop house. I live and farm at Twin Oaks Community in Central Virginia. We're located on Monacan land and we're in Zone 7, and our average last frost is April 30th and our average first frost is October 14th, to help you compare with how it is where you are. Our goal with our vegetable gardens is to feed our intentional community of 100 people with a wide range of organic produce year-round, all year. If you want to know more about the community, we have a website, twinoaks.org. So what I'm going to cover in this presentation, which is called Feeding the Soil, although really you can't feed the clay and the silt. you are feeding the little microorganisms in the soil. That's what it's really about. I'm going to cover growing and maintaining healthy soils, crop rotations, cover crops, compost making and organic mulches. And there is a PDF handout for this which includes resources, a couple of pages of resources, as well as some of the charts and so on from this presentation if you want to sit down and consider them in more detail. So, growing healthy soil. Healthy soils promote plant, animal and human health, and the point is to grow strong plants and make the conditions less suitable or unsuitable for diseases and pests. And this photo shows some very healthy tatsoi in our hoop house in the winter. Healthy soil is very alive. An acre of organic soil can have 2,400 pounds of fungi and 1,500 pounds of bacteria and many other creatures, large and small, as you can see in this diagram from USDA. And these creatures all contribute to good soil structure, cycling of the nutrients, and they increase the levels of organic matter. They're valuable, in other words. And what are healthy soils? How do you know you've got one or not? Healthy soils produce good crop yields without degrading the environment. They produce sturdy crops that resist pests and diseases. And for a disease to take hold, you need all 3 of these things: a susceptible host, a disease organism, and suitable conditions. With taking care of the soil, the main thing we're working on is the suitable conditions, making them unsuitable for diseases, making them more suitable for strong plants. Even though you might work really hard and do your best by the soil, sometimes plagues still strike. You know, some of them are airborne, they just come in. So don't blame the victim. I'm not one of those people who say that if you've got a disease or a pest, it means there's something wrong, you did something wrong. That's blaming the victim. I don't go along with that. So, the signs of a healthy soil: a good crumb structure, letting air and water in and out, resisting erosion and compaction, absorbing, holding and releasing nutrients, promoting good root growth. And in this photo you can see this clump of plants is held together by the soil and the good roots of the plants that you can see poking out there. A healthy soil provides good habitat for soil organisms, and it usually has a moderate pH, 6 to 7, although you can have a wider range than that and still have very healthy soil. Healthy soils have low levels of toxins and troublesome salts, and a healthy soil will have a balanced fertility with adequate levels of nutrients. The first part I'm going to talk about is crop rotations. This is where you make a plan to make sure that you don't grow the same type of crop too often or too frequently, is more the point, in the same piece of land. And you get many benefits from crop rotations. You will optimize the soil health and fertility, you will reduce pests and diseases, you will maximize your crop productivity, and if you plan carefully, as I'm going to show you later, you can increase your opportunity to plant cover crops and help your soil in that way. Also, crop rotations do make the planning work easier on the brain because you know what's going to come next. And if you're organically certified, you will need a crop rotation plan to meet your organic certification requirements. Before you plan a crop rotation, though, decide how your farming or gardening will support you. Are you trying to make money doing this? Are you trying to feed your household for 52 weeks of the year? Or are you trying to feed yourself for 20 weeks of the year and then go traveling? You decide what it is you want to do, what you want your farm or garden to give you. Decide what you want to grow. Don't waste time growing things that you don't like, unless you know lots of other people that do like it. Figure out how much of what you need, roughly speaking. Have an idea of when to plant each crop. And the whole planning process is circular, but you do need to start somewhere. And I have a crop planning slideshow on slideshare.net. So you can go to slideshare.net, you put my name, Pam Dawling, in the search box, and you'll see little tiles or icons for the many slideshows I have there. And you can click on one of those and watch it free. You don't hear me talk, you just see the slides, but it can be very useful for getting a bit more detail about something. So whenever you see one of these red boxes with a little screen icon in, it's telling you about another slideshow I have that you can see on slideshare.net. So the steps to creating a permanent rotation. And note that I do have a slideshow on crop rotations. First of all, and we're going to look at each one of these in a little bit more detail next, figure out how much area you need for each of your major crops. That's the ones that need the most space, the space hogs. Measure and map the land you have available. Divide it into roughly equal plots, each big enough for any one of your major crops. And then group together compatible crops to fill out a plot, another plot. Determine a good sequence. Figure out how to include as many cover crops as possible. And if you can, figure out how to include some no-till crops. And then you try the whole thing for a year. You take notes and you plan to make little changes or big changes next year, improvements. So here's the step of deciding or figuring out how much space you need for your major crops. When we sat down to do this at Twin Oaks, this is what we came up with for us, for 100 people. So you can probably knock off a couple of zeros when you think about what you need. The ones that are printed in blue are the biggest ones of all, and they're all, you'll see, between 7,000 and 9,000 square feet. So that suggests if we have a plot size of 9,000 square feet, we can fit any one of these into the plot when the turn comes around. And you can see the minor major crops, a lot of them take about half a plot. So there's an idea. Group two of these together. So you divide your land into roughly equal plots. It's nice if they're really equal and they're really big enough for each of your main crops. But you can work it without them being completely equal because you'll be growing things that are not just your major crops, and you can put a row of beans or a row of zucchini or something in at the side of one of your major crops. So we aimed for 9,000 square feet. We figured out we've got 10 plots. We have 3 garden areas. So this suggested to us a 10-part rotation. This is our east garden. The plots vary between 9,275 and 10,600 square feet. The reasons ours vary are because we used to do several strawberry plantings, and they would stay in place for 2 years or so. And so we needed that plot to be a bit bigger. But, it's all up to you. And then the next step is to group together other crops to use about the same area, to use one plot, in other words. So we decided to put 2 or 3 sweet corn plantings together in one plot. Ideally, to have all the sweet corn we would like, we need 3,500 square feet each time. So we can put 2 together easily, fit that in a plot. If we want 3 in a plot, we'll have to have a bit less sweet corn. This photo shows one of my favorite combinations, spring broccoli and cabbage together with overwintered garlic. And in this photo on the left, we've got fairly new broccoli transplants and cabbage transplants under row cover on temporary raised beds that are mulched with spoiled hay. And then in the main part, in the middle of the photo, we've got our overwintered garlic, which is also on temporary raised beds mulched with spoiled hay. And on the right, we've got a couple of strawberry beds. And from looking at that, I can see that this photo must have been taken in April, because we've got the row cover at the side of the strawberry beds to protect the flowers on frosty nights. If it was May, we wouldn't have frosty nights. So we like this combination, partly because the management is very similar, the temporary raised beds. But also, what we'll do when we get to early May is the row cover will be gone from the broccoli and from the strawberries, but we can really ignore the strawberries. The row cover will be gone from the broccoli and will be on some frost tender crops or some newly transplanted tomatoes or something. We will be reaching the point with the garlic 3 weeks before harvest, to when we want to remove anything from around the base of the plants to let the garlic dry down and not get any horrible last minute fungal diseases. So what we do is we first of all weed the broccoli and cabbage beds, and then we bring wheelbarrows into the garlic beds, and we carefully lift out the mulch and put that in the wheelbarrows, and also pull any weeds and throw them in the barrows as well. Then we go down to the bottom of the patch, take a left, take another left, push the wheelbarrow up the aisles between the broccoli rows, and we use that mixture of used mulch and weeds from the garlic to top up the mulch in the broccoli and cabbage beds. And this, as well as clearing the way for the garlic to dry down, really helps us keep the broccoli in good shape. We are making thicker mulch there, so we'll get fewer weeds, and we'll help the soil to stay damper and cooler, which is what the broccoli needs at that point. So we like this combination. We've done it for years and years. It works well for us. Another kind of combination is clustering crops which are in the same crop family, like tomatoes with peppers. These 4,000 square feet, this is a big planting of paste tomatoes for processing, and also 2,200 square feet of peppers. So we'll put those in a patch. We'll have a little bit more space. We can put something else in that plot too. Here's our crop rotation pinwheel, our 10-year crop rotation. If you wanted to see this and read more about it, it's in my book, Sustainable Market Farming. It's made of 2 pieces of card. The little disc in the middle with the ABC on it, that's the plot numbers, plot names. It's fastened to the bigger card with one of those brass paper clips with the long legs that you can fold out. And then the main pie slices show you which vegetable crop is in that particular plot this year. And when we get to New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, we turn that central disc 1 notch clockwise, and we see what's going to be in that plot in the new year, for the next year. Out on the pie crust, we have the overwintered cover crops that follow that particular food crop. And this has been a really useful format for us. You can see it still includes the strawberries. We've been round twice and more on this pinwheel rotation. So what's up next is I call this a walk around our rotation, but it's really more like stand in one plot for 10 years and watch the crops come by. But anyway, we're doing it virtually, so the first year, say, in our 10-part rotation would be winter squash, followed by rye and Austrian winter peas. So we need about 8,200 square feet of winter squash. That will satisfy our needs, and it will pretty much fill one plot. We might have room for a row of summer squash and zucchini, something like that, same crop family. That works nicely. We sow our winter squash in late May, so there's time before that for a legume winter cover crop in the mix to reach flowering before we need to prep the soil for the squash. You want to try and plan so that any legumes in your mix can reach flowering before you turn them under, because that's when you get the most nitrogen and the most value for the money you've spent on the legume seeds. We've only got one other major crop in the cucurbit family, and that's watermelon. So we plan to keep them distant time-wise in the rotation. We finish our winter squash for Halloween. We actually go in and harvest out any big but immature winter squash, and we make lanterns out of them. And it helps us determine to clear those out of the way so we can get a good winter cover crop in there. I used to kind of hang on to the food crops till the last possible minute, and then I realized you get better value by getting a timely cover crop in for the winter. So we'll do Austrian winter peas with wheat or rye. Sometimes we prefer to use wheat because it's a bit easier to incorporate, but on the other hand, it doesn't make as much biomass as rye, and it's not so cold hardy as winter rye. So you make your choices. So the next year then, in that plot, we will plant late sweet corn and sweet potatoes. This is our 6th sweet corn planting. So it's going in fairly late in the season, as are the sweet potatoes. We put them side by side. That gives time for the preceding Austrian winter peas in the cover crops to flower. And then we turn them under, we sow the corn, we plant out the sweet potatoes. We will undersow that late corn with oats and soy and leave it there as a winter cover crop. It will winter kill. That will make it easy to incorporate early next spring before the potato planting, which you're going to see on the next slide. The sweet potatoes, sadly, finish too late. Well, no, we love sweet potatoes. It's not sad. They finish too late to sow oats. They usually finish in October. That's when we dig them up. So we don't have time to put oats in. So we usually follow the sweet potatoes with wheat, which is easier, as I said, than rye to incorporate. Not so easy as a dead oats and soy cover crop, but pretty easy nonetheless. So year 3, we're planting potatoes in March. And here you see one poking up. Now, when we set out our rotation, we read that potatoes are said to do well after corn. Now, there are lots of myths about which crops do well after which other one. I have got no scientific evidence that potatoes do well after corn, but they don't do badly, I can tell you that. We haven't tested it out to see what would be best, but it works time-wise, it works to get good cover crops, and so we stick with this. So our spring potatoes in March are planted after our previous year's late corn, which we just saw. Our summer potatoes, which you'll see in a few years, we put them in after the previous year's middle sweet corn planting, the 3rd, 4th and 5th plantings. These potatoes will be harvested in early July, and then we have a crazy fast turnaround. We till in compost and then transplant our fall broccoli and cabbage right away. It does mean there's not much chance for weeds to grow in that fast turnaround. It does mean we get good use of our land in having a fast turnaround, but it can be crazy if the weather's wrong. So we don't always do it this way anymore, but it worked for a number of years. And then we undersow the fall brassicas with a mix of clovers. You'll see that on the next slide. Ladino white, medium red and crimson clover, about a month after we transplant the brassicas. And then that becomes year 4's all year green fallow. And here's a photograph of broccoli undersown with clover, and this is a sort of well, it's definitely fall. You can see the trees are turning colour. Looks like we've had the main heads out of those broccoli. So after the broccoli and the cabbage have been harvested, the next spring, year 4, we mow. That removes the tall stumps of dead broccoli, also removes the seeding annual weeds. We look at what the state of things is. We have a plan if the weeds are bad or the clover's poor, but we've never actually needed to do that. We've had a pretty good stand of clover. It doesn't look great in the spring, but it's it's reasonable compared to the number of weeds. If it was really bad, we would turn it under once we got to warm spring and sow sorghum, Sudan grass and soy. And then we would mow that every time it got to 4 or 5 feet tall. We would mow it down to 1 foot in order to persuade the roots of the sorghum Sudan grass to go deeper and to make more channels in the soil. So we would take advantage of that forced opportunity, if you like. But usually, as I say, the clover looks great. We check once every 6 weeks or something. We mow it. We don't want the crimson clover to seed because crimson clover produces hard seed, which can then linger in your soil and pop up when you don't want it, like in a carrot patch. So we let the clover grow. We mow it down every now and then. We have a definite check-in in August. If we were having problems, we would till the patch and sow oats because it's August and that's when we can do that. But I don't think we've ever actually had that happen. We leave the clovers over the winter, and just on their own, they're actually really easy to turn under next spring as well. So year 5 is next. You'll notice that we got 2 food crops in year 3, potatoes and broccoli and cabbage actually. We didn't get any food crops in year 4, but we disc under that green fallow early in year 5 and we plant our first sweet corn there and then our second sweet corn. And we can follow that early corn by fall garlic. We don't just have the one crop for this year. So after the early corn, we sow oats in the patch and we divide the plot in half. One half we keep in oats through the winter for spring broccoli in year 6, which is on the next slide. The other half we mow from time to time so it doesn't get too big until we get to late fall, and then we disc and we plant garlic. And then we harvest that garlic in early June of year 6 and we sow buckwheat and soy. And then we till that under and we sow fall carrots in late July or early August. Sometimes we keep the raised beds, sometimes we flatten them out and rebuild them. So that half plot will grow 3 food crops in 2 years: sweet corn, garlic and carrots, and have some cover crops in between. The other half of the patch in year 6 we will plant spring broccoli and cabbage in those temporary raised beds mulched with hay, as we saw in an earlier slide. Well, you didn't see the broccoli, it was under the row cover. And then the broccoli and cabbage will be finished by July. They'll be horrible and bitter by then if anything's left. We at least mow. Sometimes we disc and we sow a summer cover crop for short term until we get to early September. And then we disc and we sow winter rye, hairy vetch and Austrian winter peas in early September. This is going to be a no-till cover crop for planting paste tomatoes in year 7. Here we are in year 7. So we mow that no-till cover crop close to the ground in early May. We let it wilt for a day and then we put out lines of rope and transplant paste tomatoes and peppers into that dead mulch. Now, in our climate, that mulch is going to break down after only 6 weeks. It's not like, this is one of the things about no-till, one of the myths about no-till. You can't just mow that winter cover crop and then it serves you for the whole of the year. It does not in our climate. So it's good for 6 weeks, and then we roll out bales of spoiled hay between the rows, which leaves us time, while that no-till crop is on the ground, cover crop is on the ground, it gives us time to be harvesting more hay and bringing it if it gets spoiled. So we plant our tomato rows 5.5 feet apart, just about wide enough to squeeze in a big round bale of hay. We roll it out. Now this tomato crop will do wonderfully and it will keep going until frost, but we then have all the posts to remove and the big bits of twine before we can sow a cover crop. So by that time our option is usually winter rye with Austrian winter peas. Year 8 is our watermelon. We don't plant them till mid-May. We transplant them. So the Austrian winter peas from the previous winter's cover crop has time to flower before we disc it under in preparation for planting. And we finish the watermelon harvesting by late September. This is another crop I used to hang on to till the bitter end, but really, nope, not many people want watermelons in October, and those that do can go to the big pile that we already have under the trees in the shade. So late September we disc and we sow wheat or rye with crimson clover for the winter cover crop after the watermelon. The next year will be our mid-season sweet corn. So corn number 3, number 4, number 5 plantings. And you might think that's what you're looking at in this photo, number 3, number 4, number 5. But you're not. You're looking at 3 varieties in corn number 3. And sort of over the horizon before you get to the trees is number 4 and then number 5. Looking from the right, that short corn with the yellow flowers is a fast maturing one, bodacious. The one in the middle with the red flowers is candy corn, probably our favorite. And the one on the left, which hasn't yet reached full height or started flowering, is silver queen. And we sow all 3 of these each time we sow sweet corn, and we work our way through. It gives us, we're going for continuous sweet corn from early July to early October. Once we finish the bodacious, or as the bodacious winds down, we start harvesting the candy corn and then the silver queen, and as that winds down, we'll be harvesting the bodacious in the next planting. And then, after those 3 sweet corn plantings are finished, we've got time to plant wheat or rye with crimson clover to give us lots of nitrogen and biomass. And as I said earlier, the middle sweet corn is followed by the June potatoes in year 10. Here they are. We plant them in mid-June, and you might be thinking, oh, how can you grow potatoes in the summer? But you can. And the advantage, there are several advantages actually. One is not having all your potato eggs in one basket if you have 2 plantings, one in March and one in June. Another is that these potatoes get harvested in October, and then we store them in our root cellar. So we have only a small amount of potatoes in the root cellar during July and August and early September when it's hot and it's difficult to keep the root cellar cool. So what we do to plant these in mid-June is we make furrows, we plant the seed potatoes, we immediately cover them over and immediately hill them, although we can't see where they are. We use flags. We hill them over and then we mulch the next day or the same day with spoiled hay, unrolled, wall-to-wall carpeting. And then when the shoots start to come through the mulch, they really can. They can grow through the hill, through the mulch. Once they start to come through, we will walk through once and we will investigate anywhere where we think there's a trapped potato shoot, and this sometimes saves a few. So we harvest these in October, and we follow that with wheat or rye, with crimson clover or Austrian winter peas, depending on the weather and the exact date. So that's our 10 years of crops whizzing by. And so, as they whiz by, that's a bit mind-boggling. But we really like to have a planned crop rotation. Having the garden divided up into 10 plots makes it easier on the brain. We're just dealing with 1 or 2 at a time. We don't have to think about everything all at once. In the spring, we're opening up the rooms 1 or 2 at a time. By the beginning of July, all 10 are in use. But in August, we start to put the plots to bed with their winter cover crops. And so it's only for 1 month that we're thinking about all 10. And that annual breathing out and breathing in, it keeps us sane, more sane, helps us keep perspective on the work, and it helps us get high productivity from our land while taking good care of it, because we can plan to have lots of cover crops, which is the next topic. And as you see, I have a slideshow about cover crops. There are many, many, many possibilities of cover crops, but no one solution suits all situations and all times of year. So learn a bit and make some careful and informed choices. I suppose winter rye gets closest to being suitable for all situations and all times. I did once plant it in April, May. It wimps out in the summer. It doesn't grow big and tall and head up until you get to, don't know, August or September. And it grows over the winter. So read up, do some experiments with different ideas, take notes, make photos, and have some backup plans in case the weather or pests or diseases or weeds prevent you from following your original plan, or in case you need to make changes to the crops or to your personal work schedule. 5 steps of cover crop planning, and I'm going to say a bit more about each of these. Identify your opportunities for cover crops. Then clarify your cover crop goals for that opportunity. Make a short list of suitable cover crops for that situation. Choose from your short list. Write down your decision. Write down what you do. Write down what happens. Write down anything you think might have worked better. Maybe make a change next year. So, what are the cover crop opportunities? The easiest one to start with is in the fall after you've finished growing food crops in that plot or bed. It's easiest because the time is a bit more fluid, a bit more flexible. You're not competing with a food crop. You've got some time there when things are slowing down, so it's easiest. Once you get to late winter or early spring, if you find you have some areas, some beds or plots that aren't in cover crop and won't be planted with a food crop for 6 weeks or more, you can sow oats, and that will help control all those winter annual weeds and keep the plot in good shape until you're ready to think about planting. During the spring or summer or fall, if you have 4 weeks or more between one vegetable crop and a later one, you can sow buckwheat or soy if you've got 6 weeks. There's also frost seeding that you can do for us it would be February or maybe October. This is when the ground is frozen. You get up early in the morning when it's light, and you take your clover seed, you go out, you broadcast it, and go back indoors and have a nice cup of tea, look out the window. As the frost thaws out, the water, which was frost, takes this clover seed down a little bit into the soil, and then you don't have to do any more. You just have to watch the clover grow. You can't do this in the middle of a jungle of weeds. You've got to be able to get the seed in contact with the soil. If you have a crop failure, look at that as an opportunity for a cover crop. It's much nicer to be looking at a successful cover crop than a failed food crop, and you are taking better care of your soil. We've already seen the option of year-round cover crops that we called green fallow, and we've also seen undersowing at last cultivation. This is oats and soybeans in sweet corn. So, clarifying your main goals. So, think about a particular time and place, and think about what it is, what are your main reasons for sowing a cover crop. And then this will help you choose the best ones for the situation. Maybe it's to smother weeds and prevent them growing and seeding. Maybe you want to focus on adding organic matter and nutrients, or increase the biological activity in the soil, or reduce erosion by using actively growing roots to anchor the soil. Maybe you want to improve the tilth and the subsoil structure. Maybe you want to improve the drainage or the soil's ability to absorb and hold water. Those are all great reasons for growing cover crops, but probably you don't want to do all of them at once in every place. There are also secondary goals, or there can be, and in some situations these could become primary goals. Maybe you want to salvage leftover nutrients. For instance, if you had a crop failure and you had been generous with some compost before you planted that crop, you can plant a cover crop to suck up and bank the nutrients. Maybe you want to fix nitrogen to feed the next crop. Maybe you want to attract beneficial insects. Maybe you want to do biofumigation for pest or weed control. That's a little bit advanced, but it's certainly possible, and you can read up about it. So then choose cover crops that match your main goals and kind of keep the secondary ones in the back of your mind. Maybe you're going to find cover crops that will answer several of your goals, and those are the ones to focus on. And then you can think about doing a mixture of cover crops to meet more of the goals that you have. So if you want to smother weeds, there's lots of cover crops that will do this. The big summer grass crops, the winter grass or cereal crops, buckwheat, brassicas, lupins, clovers, soybeans, southern peas, any of those. If you want to add organic matter and improve the soil's ability to absorb and hold water, you want to go for the bulky crops, the grasses and the big legumes, not tiny little clover. If you want to increase the biological activity in the soil, you make a mix. More different crops means more different activities. If you want to reduce erosion, you want the cover crops that have good strong roots, fibrous roots, especially the grass crops and sweet clover, southern peas and subclover. If you want to improve the soil structure, whether that's the tilth at the surface or the subsoil or the drainage, you want the cover crops with big roots. Ones that go down deep like sorghum Sudan grass, or quite chunky like sunflower and forage radish and sugar beet and so on. Alfalfa, lupin, southern peas, those all have nice big roots. Now your secondary goals, if you want to scavenge leftover nutrients, don't put legumes in the mix. They will provide more. You want the grasses. You might want brassicas. We never ever ever use brassicas as a cover crop, partly because we have harlequin bugs and we don't want to feed them year round, partly because we like to do a lot of brassica food crops and we would get rotation problems if we had too many of them in cover crops as well. There's also annual ryegrass, another one we never ever ever grow. In zone 7 it becomes a weed, so if you're in zone 7 or warmer, stay away from annual ryegrass. If you're in zone 5 or cooler, have at it. If you're in zone 6, be careful. Watch it and see. Do it on a small scale first. If you want to fix nitrogen, then you do want the legumes. There's lots of different ones, clovers and peas and beans and vetches and sun hemp. Depending on the time of year, different ones, different situations. If you want to attract beneficial insects, you're going to need flowers. So buckwheat, any of the legumes, the brassicas if you're growing those, phacelia. If you want pest and weed control, read more about this, but winter rye, brassicas, sorghum Sudan grass, sun hemp, white lupins, sesame, different ones for different pests or weeds. Mustards. Here's a summary of cover crops for fall in our kind of climate. Zone 7. In September, if it's before the 15th, we can sow oats. And any time in September, we can sow winter rye, winter wheat, winter barley, hairy vetch, crimson clover, red clover, Austrian winter peas. But do remember, it's only worth putting legumes in a mix if there's enough time in spring for them to flower before you turn them under, or get close to it. You know, if you've got a late flowering thing and you're turning it under and it's barely growing, you might just as well have put the dollar bills out on the soil and tilled them in, I think. So don't waste your money. If it's October, if it's before the 14th, we'll sow winter wheat with crimson clover or red clover. If it's 15th or later, we'll sow winter wheat or winter rye with Austrian winter peas. We've got a sort of clover shed or legume shed in the middle of October. Crimson clover and red clover before the middle, Austrian winter peas after the middle. Once we get to November, if it's the first week of November, we can sow winter wheat or winter rye with Austrian winter peas. If it's the second week of November, which is a month past our average frost date, it's getting cold, winter rye is the only cover crop that's worth sowing. And then you want to think twice, really. Once you get into the second, third, fourth, once you get into November, You want to think about how much growth your cover crop is going to be able to make before it gets cold and growth slows down or stops. You don't want to have tiny, spindly little rye shoots that have got hardly any roots in the winter. That will not hold your soil together. You would do better to keep the weeds, because those weed roots will hold your soil together. You can mow if it's dry enough, or you can mow to stop them seeding, but you do not want to disturb those roots. Here's some more information about oats. Winter-killed cover crops can be really useful for smothering weeds and then gracefully dying, so that the soil is covered and held in place till spring, but then it's very easy for you to incorporate the dead stuff, so you can get ready for planting sooner. We like to sow oats where we're going to plant the early spring crops the next year. But we need an early finishing crop to be able to sow the oats between August the 5th and September 17th, or middle of September, say. So we can use oats after growing early sweet corn, spring broccoli, cabbage, spring planted potatoes, any of those, or other spring crops. It depends how you grow things, but spinach and peas and all those things. And then we sow the oats, and they finish early. They die in the cold weather in our zone. And the next year you can plant. It's pretty much the same kind of list. The early planted things: potatoes, broccoli, carrots, spinach, first sweet corn, all those things. So this is a kind of early segment of the rotation. It's an early finishing crop, a winter-killed cover crop, and an early planted next year crop. It's good to try and include legumes wherever you can, so you get that nitrogen added to the soil. If you have a good stand with good flowering and good number of plants, that can provide all the nitrogen the next crop will need. So we plan for this with our later planted crops. We plan not to need to put compost out for them, unless the legume in the cover crop didn't do well. Remember, Austrian winter peas can be sown later than clovers, although this clover is so beautiful. During the warm weather, you can plant southern peas, sun hemp, soybeans as warm weather legumes. And as I said earlier, for the most nitrogen, you want to grow the legume cover crops till they start to flower, or at least until they're in bud. Otherwise, you won't get so much nitrogen. Here's more information about using crimson clover over the winter. We want vegetable crops that are cleared by the end of September or the middle of October. And examples of those are some of our sweet corn, the June planted potatoes, watermelons, sometimes tomatoes and peppers if we have an early frost. And then we will sow crimson clover with wheat between September 20th and October 15th. And we will turn it under in late April. And the next year, therefore, we need crops that we can plant after late April. The later sweet corn plantings, the winter squash, transplanted watermelon, tomatoes, peppers, sweet potatoes, June planted potatoes, fall brassicas. There's actually quite a lot of options that we're planting after late April. It's after the frost and a bit more. Here's Austrian winter peas. We use these after our late finishing crops, which include winter squash, melons, sweet potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, the middle sweet corn plantings, the June planted potatoes. And then we will sow the Austrian winter peas with winter wheat or rye between October the 1st and November 7th. And then we want to follow that the next year with crops that are planted after May the 1st. And if you look, you see it's the exact same list as can be followed by Austrian winter peas and winter wheat and rice, the late finishing ones. Now obviously you don't want to follow winter squash with winter squash, even with Austrian winter peas and winter rye in between. You choose something else off that list when you make your rotation plan. For late spring and summer, we also like to do cover crops whenever we can. Once we get to late April, when it's close to our average last frost, we'll sow the frost tender cover crops like buckwheat or soy or southern peas, something like that. mixed with a grain such as winter rye or wheat for insurance, and also they call it a nurse crop, something that shields the tender babies from harsh weather. Um, if we get a gap in the summer between one vegetable crop finishing and the planting of another, we will sow buckwheat or soy. Once we're past our corn planting date, if we have a space that's worth planting with a cover crop, we will do sorghum Sudan grass for the rest of the warm season, if the time gap is long enough. I do want to say though, sorghum Sudan grass is a big plant. You only want to grow this if you've got tractor equipment. If you're working with walk-behind mowers and tillers and so on, stick with the millets, which I'll show you shortly. We're often, in the summer, we're often doing small areas of, it's like a bed of lettuce or a bed of summer squash, something that's short-lived, a bed here, a bed there. We usually will do the buckwheat and soy. We will broadcast it and then till it in with our walk-behind BCS tiller. Buckwheat, nice and easy, warm season, broadleafed annual. You probably don't have any crops related to it. Rhubarb is, but it's perennial and cool weather, so it's out the way. It germinates very quickly. It takes 30 to 50 days to grow to full size, which is not very big. It's 2 to 3 feet. We sow this from around our last frost date to late summer, until it's 50 days before the first frost expected. And you want to incorporate buckwheat 7 to 10 days after it starts flowering, unless you are deliberately setting out to have self-seeded buckwheat and another planting, in which case you let it seed and then you mow it before the new ones come up. Buckwheat is a great useful cover crop in place of crop failure or an early end to a food crop. An early end can be a good thing. It can be that something you grew was so popular that it's all gone and you've now converted it to food in stomachs and money in the bank. So it's all good. You've got money, you can have buckwheat. Here's the millets. Meet the millets. This photograph is pearl millet. There's German foxtail millet, which grows 3 to 4 feet tall. Japanese millet grows 3 to 5 feet tall. Watch out for pearl millet. It grows 5 to 10 feet tall. Not something to do with small equipment either. Pearl millet and the German foxtail millet will mow kill after heading up, which is to say, once they've headed up, you can mow them down and they won't regrow. And you can, if you want to do a no-till in warm weather, you can plant into that mulch. But Japanese millet and the brown top millets don't mow kill, so don't try that at home or anywhere. A little bit more about incorporating cover crops into the soil when you're doing that. You want to grow them as big as possible, maximum biomass, maximum nitrogen if it's a legume, but you want to incorporate the cover crops before the plant sets seed. Otherwise you'll be planting those seeds when you incorporate the cover crop. It helps to mow before incorporating. So if you're using a tractor, you can use a bush hog. On a small scale, a nylon line weed whip. You want something that chops the plants up into small pieces. Sickle bar mowers and scythes leave long, strawy stuff, which is just what you want if you're doing a no-till and you want that cover crop to stay in place like a straw mulch. But if you're incorporating it, you want to cut it up into tiny pieces. And then you want to till shallowly, putting the cover crop where the soil life is busy, not 6 feet under. Or anything close. If you're direct sowing the next crop, you want to think in spring about incorporating the cover crop 3 to 4 weeks before you plan to sow, especially winter rye. Winter rye and to some extent some of the other crops exude chemicals from their roots which inhibit small seeds from germinating. So if you're planning to sow early carrots, make sure you get the rye turned under 3 or 4 weeks before. I'm going to say a little bit about organic no-till cover crops, where you leave the cover crop on the surface. You kill the cover crop without tilling it under. You plant food crops into the dying residue. Now there's 3 ways to kill cover crops without herbicides. One's winter killing, but that depends on having the winter in the right place and the right kind of cover crop. There's mow killing, and that has some restrictions too, the things that don't mow kill or the stages at which they don't. Roll killing is another option, crimping and roll killing, but it usually requires special equipment. It's usually large scale. I've just recently read Daniel May's lovely book, No-Till Organic Vegetable Farmer, and in there are some fun photos of two people with a T-post on the ground. They're one each side of the bed. They have one boot is tied to the horizontal T-post with twine, and there's a loop of twine for their hand. And then it's a bit like a three-legged race. First of all, they step forward with their free foot, and then they, together, in coordination, they lift their boot foot that's tied to the T-post, move forward a bit, stomp down on the T-post, and that lays the cover crop flat and crimps it a bit. So I haven't tried it. It looks good for small scale. You should try it. All right, no-till cover crops. As I said, we plant our tomatoes and peppers into a mowed cover crop of winter rye, hairy vetch, and Austrian winter peas. The classic mix is just the winter rye and hairy vetch, which is what we used to do. But we heard that Austrian winter peas reduce the incidence of septoria leaf spot in following tomato crops, so we now put them in the mix as well. Who's to say whether we all at the same time we've been selecting our Roma paste tomato seeds for more resistance to septoria. So we now have less septoria, but how much has been due to one task and how much to the other, I don't really know. The advantages of no-till are that it reduces inversions of the soil. The legumes in the mix can supply all the nitrogen the tomatoes need, provided it was a good solid stand, like in this photo. We need to sow rye, vetch and peas in early to mid-September, so we have to figure out a preceding crop that is finished by then to be able to do this no-till. Moving on to compost making. Compost improves the organic matter, the humus and the soil structure, and the effects of compost last longer in the soil than cover crops and crop residues, especially in humid climates like mine, where the plant material breaks down very rapidly in the soil. Compost also adds beneficial bacteria and fungi to the soil, which can inoculate plants against diseases. It's called induced systemic acquired resistance. Basically, the plants produce antibodies and other compounds and ward off diseases. Lastly, making compost uses materials that might otherwise be a waste disposal problem. And watch out, if you're certified organic, you need to follow the organic rules, which are fairly precise. We make lots of compost. One of our businesses is making and selling tofu, and there's a byproduct of making tofu which is called okara. It looks like cottage cheese and we mix that with high carbon sources such as sawdust from our hammock making business or wood chips that we trade with a neighbour. And then we add food scraps from the kitchen and the dining hall, sometimes weeds or crop refuse from our garden. Sometimes in the summer we just leave them to die on the surface. And we use our tractor bucket to lift and turn the piles. We don't have fancy special equipment. Compost making is an art and a science. There are several methods and recipes. I'm a big fan of hot aerobic compost, where you combine 1 to 3 parts of high carbon materials with 1 part of high nitrogen materials in somewhere in a ratio of 25 to 1 to 40 to 1 carbon to nitrogen, and enough water to make it all damp and enough air to keep the bacteria alive. And then for the first 2 or 3 days after you make a pile, the mesophilic bacteria move in and multiply themselves. They're active at 90 to 110 Fahrenheit, and they begin to break down the sugars, fats, starches and proteins. And then the pile moves into the thermophilic stage, which lasts several weeks. You get different kind of bacteria, and the temperatures will rise to 120 to 150 Fahrenheit in the middle of the pile. And those thermophilic bacteria will be multiplying themselves and consuming the decomposable materials, and as long as there's enough oxygen. And this process will kill pathogens and weed seeds and fly larvae, and this is a big part of why I like to do aerobic compost. And I will say the next few photos include some very inspiring photos of special large-scale compost turning equipment. None of this is ours, it's sort of inspirational. This is a compost turning machine, and this is a different kind of compost turning machine. When the pile starts to cool down, you want to turn it. It means that more oxygen or more water is needed. The bacteria have had to slow down at work, so you want to supply them with more, give them more supplies. The turning remixes the material, which means that the stuff on the outside gets put near the middle and the bacteria can get at it. Also, turning will prevent the pile from overheating. You don't want to let it get above 150, otherwise you'll kill off your thermophilic workers. If you find while you're turning it that it's not damp anymore, you need to add water. It should be damp but not dripping. It should be like a squeezed out sponge. When it stops heating up, even though you turn it, this means that the bacteria have consumed all the materials they can. They've converted the nitrogen to nitrates, and the pile will cool down to around 100 Fahrenheit. And you can buy a long stem compost thermometer if you're learning this. When you're experienced, you just can look at it and feel it and go, oh yeah, this is what I need to do next. But when you're learning, a compost thermometer is helpful. So once you get to this stage, turning isn't going to reheat the pile. The carbon in the pile is resistant to further breakdown. The nitrogen will slowly be available for your crops. So if you can, leave it to cure for about 30 days on soil, not on concrete, and this will allow beneficial soil microorganisms to move back in, and then you can use it. That's a compost screen thing in the background, and an elevator kind of gadget. Compost thrower. Yeah, compost thrower. Yeah. Anyway, here's a little slide about compost troubleshooting in case you've made some and had problems. If you have too much water in your mix, this will push out the air, won't let the bacteria get the air they need. The pile will slow down, go anaerobic, and emit foul-smelling byproducts, and your neighbors may tell you. If you have too much nitrogen in the mix, it's going to give off the extra nitrogen as ammonia. You know what ammonia smells like. Your neighbors may tell you about this as well. A little bit of ammonia loss, nitrogen loss is inevitable, but as a compost maker you want to strive to minimize the loss by getting a good balanced mix. If you don't have enough nitrogen in the mix, on the other hand, like you've piled up tree leaves and nothing else, or water maybe, the pile won't heat up. You'll still be able to make a useful product, but it will be slow. You can make leaf mold or whatever it is from your high carbon mixture. Finished compost ideally will have a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 10 to 1 if you had the right mix to start with and you got the right bacteria and everything went lovely. If your carbon to nitrogen ratio is greater than about 25 to 1, almost no nitrogen is available from the compost. If your ratio is between 16 to 1 and 20 to 1 carbon to nitrogen, about 10% of the nitrogen is going to be available. So it's really worth trying to get a good ratio, a good recipe. Even at the ideal carbon to nitrogen ratio of 10 to 1, only 50% of the nitrogen is available in the near term. And this is good news because the rest of it is available later. So it is a long-term plan, making compost. About 10% of the nitrogen in a good compost pile will remain after harvest of for the next crop. After, you put the compost out, 50% of it is available for that crop immediately planted, and then During the course of growing that first crop, you'll use up another 40%. At the end of that crop, there'll be 10% left to carry forward for the next crop. So you can take different approaches. Some growers aim to build the soil up to a high overall starting fertility level and then maintain it each year with smaller applications. Others aim to apply a consistent amount each year. And this is your decision. It might be, if you're starting a new garden, you might buy in a big old load of compost to start with, spread that out, and then after that make your own and just put smaller amounts on each year. Or you may be already making your own and you can't put out a high load all at once. You'll be putting out a consistent amount each year. But even if you can't do a consistent amount, it's generally agreed that the occasional shortfall in compost application won't be too bad for your soil fertility if it's already high from previous applications. And I can vouch for this because it's happened to us. You might have read ponderings about how much compost to use. And some people worry about using too much compost and getting high levels of phosphorus in the soil. And this happened to us. We have very high levels of phosphorus in the soil. We made a few changes. We did more cover crops. We spread less compost. We didn't include any animal material in the compost. And I went around and asked different growers that I knew what they thought about too much phosphorus. And I read up about phosphorus. Generally, phosphorus is fairly tightly bound in your soil. So if you're spreading phosphorus out of a bag, NPK, and it's all soluble, and then you have a heavy rainfall, yes, it all will erode, wash away downhill. But if you're putting it on in compost, it's not going to wash away immediately. It's going to be bound in the soil. So I asked around I looked around to see what some well-known, well-respected growers are doing in terms of compost spreading. And Steve Moore, who's a veteran high tunnel grower that I learned a lot from, he uses 12 to 27 gallons for 100 square feet. Elliot Coleman, one of my early garden gurus, in his winter harvest handbook, he recommends 20 gallons to 100 square feet for each successive crop outdoors. And in his hoop house, he uses 41 gallons a 100 square feet. Michigan State University Student Farm, they use 25 gallons a 100 square feet before every crop. Ben Hartman in the Lean Farm doesn't even measure it in gallons. He puts out 8 to 12 inches of compost on new raised beds and then reshape them once a year, and if they think they need a top up, they'll use an inch or two of compost if they think the soil needs help. And they now have a 10 to 12% organic matter. So you make your own choices, you make your own decisions, you see what other people are doing. Another thing you can do if you want more compost is to grow compost materials and cut and haul them. If you've got land where you're not growing food crops, outside your deer fence or something, you don't want to improve the soil right there, right then, you can grow compost crops and cut them and haul them to your compost piles. And this is a way to boost the amount of compost you get in the near term. Or, it's still a long-term plan, but the fairly near term. And it's a good way to grow food crops very intensively in a small area, such as if you need to put up a big deer fence, which is expensive, and you can grow your cover crops outside, compost crops outside. Lastly, I want to talk about mulches, and these will all help your soil life as well. Organic mulches like straw, hay, sawdust, wood chips, tree leaves, newspaper and cardboard, they will all add organic matter to your soil. And what we're doing here is preparing a new strawberry bed. We've got a double layer of newspaper. We overlap by a couple of inches so there aren't any gaps. And then normally, in a normal year, we would top this up with spoiled hay. Well, this particular time, we didn't have enough hay. So what we did was we made our own hay from sorghum Sudan grass. Behind the workers there, that tall crop you see growing, that's sorghum Sudan grass. And the previous cutting we let dry and made hay, and so we're using that for our strawberry bed. So you can make your own mulches. You can grow your own hay or straw. Here are my books, Sustainable Market Farming and the Year-Round Hoop House. I hope you like them. Here's the contact, well, it's not really the contact information so much. Well, if you go to my website, sustainablemarketfarming.com, I have a contact me page, and you can do that. You can also leave comments on any of the blog posts. And that's it for now, so thank you very much. Hope you've enjoyed this, and remember to check out the handout, the PDF, and the resources list. Thank you.